Hello dear viewer, let me ease you into this video with a bit of exposition. Based on my channel, it is pretty clear that I am very fond of folklore, and a fantasy franchise based on Slavic folklore is bound to be pretty interesting for me. My first encounter with The Witcher was back when the third game came out. I very much adored the folklore aspect of the game world, but at the time I did not care much for the characters. Except for Gaunter Odim.
Greetings, Geralt. Remember me?
To this day I think he is one of the best antagonists in entertainment. Who cares about this von Everett guy? Just be done with his murder so Gaunter that he can give me more interesting tasks. But back on the subject, I was not really immersed in the story, probably because I was more interested in other franchises at the time, which have since been run to the ground. By the time the series came, my memory of the game's setting, characters and story has faded, but I did plan to watch it. After glowing recommendations from my friends and family, and listening to some positive and mixed reviews on YouTube, I finally sat down and watched it. At first, it was difficult to keep up. The series expects the viewer to be familiar with the setting, and I barely remembered a few names and concepts. The episodes have little in the way of explaining events, places, or just things generally, mostly mentioning them in short sentences, if at all, which might be more natural conversation-wise, but I should not be expected to search for external sources of information to understand the show. It should be able to stand on its own.
You know, the elves called this Dol Blathana before bequeathing it to the humans and retreating into their golden palaces in the mountains. There I go again, just delivering exposition.
Again, this is the only time you or anyone really does something of the sort.
Come here.
Yeah.
This issue was worsened for me with the timeline being all jumbled up. I did not even realize it until episode 4. Sure, there were subtle hints, but I already had my hands full trying to memorize who's who. All in all, by the end, I was left a bit disappointed, and not entirely due to what I've just said. I saw cracks in the show's foundation, issues with world building that should be addressed. I just couldn't help but feel that it could have been done so much better in many regards. After that, I had the unique idea, like most people on the planet, to replay The Witcher 3. This time, I was much more fond of it. I actually immersed myself in the game, learning of the world, characters, places and events. So I thought to myself, maybe I should rewatch the series again. It ought to be easier to follow the story now. I was right. I did like it more, but some issues were still there, not necessarily relating to the story, but to the overall believability of the world. Advocating for realism in a fantasy show might seem silly, but without clear rules there are no clear stakes, ultimately undermining the story itself. We need to know the boundaries of a setting to be able to appreciate danger or difficult feats. Things should be consistent and make sense, otherwise anything can happen at any given time. Disney Star Wars. During the rewatch, I took some notes on my previous gripes, precisely to be able to make this video. I collected them because they are issues that should be addressed, and some of them can be, but while writing quality may get worse or improve for later seasons, the foundation has already been set, and future episodes must adhere to these occasionally very vague rules. Before we go any further, I must say that I did not read the books myself, and I only played the third game. I also played Gwent. I don't think that Gwent counts. It does have several lore blurbs though, which is more than this bloody series has. I did do a bit of research though, where it was necessary, but in most cases I will treat the series separately. One of my main issues with the series is the inconsistencies of magic. In an early scene in episode 2, we hear this line.
There is no conjuring something from nothing. There is a give and a take.
Then we are shown that to lift a rock, a plant has to die. While it is pretty vague, it's clear. Even to do something so little as to levitate a stone, some life has to be given. But this is very muddled up by spells used even prior to or right after this scene. I have collected every spell in Season 1 and recorded what they cost, and this is what I found. Teleporting costs nothing. Untraceable portal opening requires the small part of a specific plant. Lifting a small rock requires the life of a flower or a human hand. Mind reading is free. Catching lightning has no cost. Portal opening costs nothing. Time slow costs nothing. Mind control costs nothing. Telekinesis is free this time. Divination requires one skin-eating bald boy. Viagra spell needs incense. Calling a djinn requires a ritual, but has no clear cost. Paralysis has no cost. Duplicating matter, or in other words, creating something from nothing,
There is no conjuring something from nothing.
has 0 cost. Force field has no cost. Fireball costs a person's life. Summoning items has no cost. Creating fog and breaking down a door costs a life. Magic Skype has no cost. Summoning poison mushrooms has no cost. Mass murder at no cost. Sword teleportation makes you a bit tired, and then you run out of mana. Arrow portal free of charge. Just plain old murder has no cost. Force push, 0 cost. And last but not least, magic flamethrower requires a bit less fire, I guess. I did not include the magic of Ciri's bloodline and Geralt's signs because they are a bit different. But from this list it seems that magic has a great cost, if the plot requires it to do so, or if you are evil. The worst part is that was it not for the scene that establishes magic to have a high cost, this would not be an issue at all. Spellcasting would be very vague, sure, but it would still be better than the show outright contradicting itself. One could argue that the weird Morael thing supplies the sorcerers with magic, and only those not in their ranks actually need to sacrifice something. But then, why did Yennefer's first teleport cost nothing? And the lesson where it actually does cost something to cast spells? Is it exclusive perhaps to that room, so that they can show young mages that magic has a cost? Well, it's quite a cruel lesson for them to learn something they do not need to know because they'll be supplied for life anyway. Additionally, if casting spells requires life, wouldn't it be extremely easy to abuse it? Just take the life of one of your enemies to cast a spell and kill another one with it. Think of a very energy demanding spell, like, I don't know, boiling an army alive, and use the life of another army to fuel it. Mages would be unstoppable. Be rude to one of them, and he'd just summon a fine wine at the cost of your limbs, for example. Magic is a mess in this show, and there really is no good way to remedy that, or at least none that I can think of, so we'd better move on. I hate to praise Game of Thrones for anything after the later seasons gut punched everything that was established before them.
Come here.
Yeah.
But I always believed that the show had an organically diverse cast, with each character's ethnicity roughly corresponding with the real-world equivalent of their place of origin. I expected the same to be true for The Witcher, with European-esque people inhabiting the northern realms, southern regions being more akin to the Middle East, and Ophir representing Africa. I was surprised to see that it was not the case. The distribution seemed to be random, more similar to present-day United States, which was a bit immersion-breaking at first. But it turned out that I was wrong, even though I believe this was unintentional based on my next point, but the creators of the show nailed what this world should look like. In this sense, more so than the games. Let me explain. If you've only seen the show, you would be forgiven not to know what the conjunction of the spheres is. It was mentioned briefly in 2 sentences, but I myself had missed it on my first viewing.
See when humans and monsters all arrived after the conjunction of the spheres.
It is one of the most important events in the history of that world. Roughly 1500 years ago, many worlds collided in a magical cataclysm affecting the multiverse, causing many creatures and monsters to appear in this one. Humans were among the new arrivals. There we go. Humans were thrown into this world during a natural disaster. It would be very likely for them to arrive all over the place, regardless of under what climate they lived. Bunch of them probably landed in the ocean, the poor sods. So, this means that what we see is just a result of the random nature of the event. You might ask, who were the original inhabitants of this land? Well, I'm going to answer that in tandem with a point related to what I've just mentioned. The reason why I think the showrunners unintentionally got the former point right. The fantasy races of the show lived here before the conjunction, like dwarves and elves. Which means that this riot lady and this little guy with his family are natives of the frozen north.
The fuck are you doing here?
Before I get into counter-arguments, I just have to say that ethnicity is practically a synonym for genetics. It's not something that is decided by coin flip at birth. It is a result of the countless generations that came before you, where they lived and the lifestyles they adapted. If it is thrown around randomly in a series, it makes the world seem less realistic, not adhering to the laws of nature, ultimately rendering the story less immersive. That being said, these problems are easily addressed. The habitat of the Dryads already seems very unlike the surrounding snowy plains. Plus, this lady speaks as if she herself only traveled to this forest, not to mention that she is the only one who speaks Sirius language. Concerning the elven boy, he only needs a bit of a backstory, how he and his family arrived from southern lands, when he was little, or even unborn. The point is that this is not a problem yet, but the creators need to address it and should pay more attention to what geographic region the story takes place in and cast natives accordingly. If a gnome as white as this man's ass appears in Ophir, he needs a backstory to justify that, and vice versa. The next point I have is related to dwarves. At first glance, it seems a fun idea to cast actors with dwarfism to play the fantasy race, but it does lead to some questions. Humans presumably can still be affected by dwarfism in that universe. So what happens then? Do people think that they have given birth to a person from a different species? Do they send them to live with dwarves? Do they think it's caused by dwarves? There is ample animosity between the two races, even though it is not shown in the series. Does this lighten or worsen the differences? This is not an issue per se. These are legitimate questions that should be explored in future episodes. The second to last notable point before I get into nitpicks involves Nilfgaard. It's depicted as this pathetic joke of a kingdom, people laughing at them, belittling them every chance they get. Even when their armies march in the north, it's just a bunch of unintimidating nobodies, wielding a grand total of 2 kinds of weapons. A wobbly sword with protrusions on its back, which serve no purpose save for making it look a bit evil, or an axe. Alright, a few of them do have bows. And they wear bloody scrotum armor. Seriously, what is it made of? Did they skin pensioners? Even in the few chances they get to talk, they seem like fanatics, not actual people with fears or hopes.
Tell me what I want to know and you'll live.
I am already saved.
Where is Cirilla?
No one is left. We shall be born anew. Thus it shall be. Watch for the signs. What signs these shall be, I say unto you.
Look at these absolute bozos charging at a closed gate without any means of breaking it open. It's a miracle they got into the city with no siege equipment. Did someone leave the city gates open? They even attack the mages in small, easily defeatable detachments, with their reinforcements giving the defenders a bit of a breather between waves. This is not how you portray a formidable antagonistic force. They die by the thousands and just move forward with no battle plan. They are practically orcs from the Lord of the Rings, but more pathetic. Not to mention that one of the book's selling points is that it depicts every person as morally grey. There are no good and bad guys. Something the showrunners clearly don't want. Again, I hate to bring up Game of Thrones.
Come here.
Yeah.
But in earlier seasons almost every character was an actual person, with both good and bad in them. Sure, it means that some people will root for the Nilfgaardians and not the Northerners, but is that so bad? I myself have always supported Nilfgaard in the game. even though most people, including Geralt, treat them with disdain, but they are still shown to be humans, not glorified meat fodder that's come to take our lands with no strength other than numbers. Anyway, this is not something competent writing can solve, further characterizing the Empire's denizens in the future, but there is still one more major thing I have yet to mention, which is not exclusive to the series. Practically the entire plot of Ciri, as well as a significant part of Yennefer's story, revolve around their blood, or rather, that they are related to elves. Elven hybridization is quite common in fantasy, which is unsurprising since elves and humans look quite alike. Their genetics could potentially be very similar. It is not the case for the Witcher's universe, however. Remember, humans arrived from a different planet. It's already pretty fortunate that the two worlds share a similar atmosphere and gravity, but for elves and humans to have evolved in complete isolation in such a manner that they are capable of producing hybrids, the chances are astronomically small. This is a huge coincidence. Sure, it is technically not impossible. It's not impossible that when I die my body turns into a fist and punches Dandelion, but I would not bet any money on it. Anyway, this is nothing that can retroactively be changed. I just had to point this out. I still have a few more nitpicky points. The existence and prominence of ghouls should be more impactful, with people actively going out of their way to burn corpses. All corpses, everywhere. Just look at how many of them attack Geralt for a few bodies. Think of how many the aftermath of a battle would lure. The Elven Keep at Sodden Hill should be a trader paradise, not a derelict ruin. It's supposed to be the only land route to the north from the south. Think of all the merchandise that would move through this place. Finally, my last point is more of a sin for most movies and shows. Armor has no effect. It's just there for show. So, these are all the criticisms and nitpicks I have in regards to the world building of the Netflix series. I do wish that the second season at least tries to remedy some of them, as there is room for improvement concerning the future of this show. It is part of a franchise with huge potential, and I only wish the best for the coming years. Please don't Game of Thrones it though.